We had a very good meeting this morning with mayors and city council and representatives, senators from suburban cities that are directly affected, and of course they're strongly supportive of the Southwest line, as I remain, and as the two committee chairs, Senator Dibble and Representative Hornstein, who both happen to represent the area directly affected, Kenilworth area in Minneapolis, also expressed their strong desire to see this proceed. It's a question of, getting it resolved in a way that Minneapolis, as mayor, the city council can support it and offer municipal consent, which is, if not absolutely legally required, is certainly desirable in terms of getting the project the kind of broad support that it needs. So we stressed that we thought this is a more effective way to move ahead than just ramming into a collision and all the fallout from that and the further delays that would cause. And I think they came away with a understanding of what the strategy is, and they're not happy with it, and they're not happy with the fact that other possible routes are going to be considered because they like the one that doesn't affect them, which is understandable. But I think all things considered, it came out positively, and the real key now is we're going to develop a process that includes citizen participation, people who especially felt that they weren't listened to the last time. And somebody said, the tendency was to come forward with decisions and then have public meetings about the decisions rather than before the decisions were made, have a chance for people to express their views and the like. And of course, getting some of the remaining questions on the environmental impact and a couple of other areas like that answered. So I think we'll come out ahead as a result of the process. It's going to take a little longer, but it's better to get it done right.
Is any concern about losing federal money, Governor, over the...
Well, I had a conference call about 10 days ago with Senator Franken, Representative Ellison, and Senator Klobuchar was chairing a committee, but her staff was there. And we asked that question. The trouble is there was nobody at the FTA answering the phone that day. So no one can say definitively. But their judgment and our best judgment is that this delay by itself would not be a factor. And according to the Met Council staff, at the end of May is really when we have to have a definitive package and the financing and have most of these details worked out for them.
Governor, when all is said and done, are you confident that the current alignment for the LRT through the Kenilworth corridor in the two-tunnel configuration will end up being what we're looking at?
I don't know. I'm not going to say because the purpose of this undertaking is to look at all possibilities that have been considered before and look for anything that hasn't been considered before. I deeply regret that the process has come to this point, and there are all various different opinions about how we got to this point, which is subject to a lot of dispute, but it isn't going to correct the situation that we're in now. But what promises were made 10 years ago or agreements, and what was going to be shifted and what wasn't, and what was temporary and what's permanent, and all that is just part of the flotsam circling around this project. But the reality is we're at a critical point here with a major route that seems to have, so far has been determined to be the most desirable or the least undesirable. Faces very strong opposition from the mayor of Minneapolis, and we're told Minneapolis City Council, and so we got to find a way we can accommodate those concerns if at all possible, at least have a process where they're assured that, for example, the city waters are not going to be affected by the light rail tunnel if that's the route and method chosen. So we just got to work through it all. I'm not going to prejudge where it's going to come out.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the citizen participation that you're...
Well, Chair Haig was, was at a National Railroad conference, so she was not present, but she said before that there's been a lot of citizen participation. There's a Citizens Advisory Council that's, I guess, about 50 people, and there's a local government advisory group, and there's another group. I mean, they've had a variety of participation. So one of the questions that we raised today is, what's missing, and where have concerned citizens not been involved or not been heard? And we didn't come up with an answer to that, but we'll have another meeting next week, and that's what we need to put together as a process by which citizens can feel that their questions are going to be answered and that they'll have a chance to comment before final decisions are made. And, you know, people may not be satisfied with the results, but hopefully they can respect the process.
Governor, for the 90+% of Minnesotans who aren't affected by the Southwest line, have you and the Transportation Commissioner made any progress on coming up with a new transportation financing package?
Well, he's developing the options. We're looking at them. You know, we're still, he's got an immediate situation now where $300 million of additional bonding was made possible. They found the money in the last session. There wasn't additional funding provided, but they put out a request for a proposal. Those proposals came in, and they're in the process now of reviewing those and deciding which projects in the so-called corridors of commerce will be selected, and the bonding authority begins July 1st of next year. So that's really been the focus on their part up until now. As soon as that part's decided, then we'll go on to the next round.
Governor, if this procedure you're undergoing at Mayo is not as effective as you might think, would it give you any kind of reconsideration of running for another term?
No. Last I read, you know, brain cells are located in the head, not the hip, and I don't see anything about it. You know, it's been painful the last 4 months, but you know that's part of life, and I'm pretty tough. And I don't, you know, hopefully this will correct it, and if not, I'll limp along with it.
Governor, why did you choose this kind of procedure, which is unusual, and some say it's still experimental? Why are you going with this?
Because that's what the Mayo doctors recommend. I mean, I left the decision to them. I mean, I made the final decision, but I left the recommendation entirely to them. They don't think surgery would be helpful in this situation, so I take their word for it.
Governor, what is your understanding that the procedure entails? What are they going to do to you?
You know, sometimes ignorance is bliss. No, my understanding is they're going to withdraw blood from me somewhere, and then put that in a kind of a centrifuge to concentrate the platelets, and then they're going to put a needle and inject that into the damaged area. And before that or after that, they're going to put another needle in and put electric current into the damaged area to try to stimulate the regeneration. So local anesthesia, they said take an hour, and then I go back, and you know the main thing they stress is that they need to stay off of my leg entirely for the first 2 days or so, and then you know for the next 10 days thereafter. One of the reasons that they say it hasn't repaired itself is because I'm using it all the time. I mean, I haven't been able to just give it the time it needs being inactive in order for it to have a chance to really heal, and so I'm going to do that.
And how did you injure yourself, Governor?
What's that?
How did you injure yourself?
I was going on down the main stairs of the residence in Saturday in June. I just gotten back from the trade mission, and I was late to some event, and I just took the last 2 steps, 2 at a time, and pivoted and felt this pop, kind of pop I used to get playing hockey if I had a bad sprain, and I had a bad sprain.
Governor, do you expect it to inhibit your ability to campaign in the next 2 months?
We'll have to see in 2 weeks what I'm able to do. It's limited. Some of my travel around the state in the last couple of months, I certainly would acknowledge that, but it hasn't limited my ability to function. And we've been meeting with staff and commissioners and people on the budget, the bonding bill, and all sorts of those items, the unsession. So it hasn't affected my performance. It's affected my mobility a bit, and I hope that'll be taken care of. We'll see.
Governor, also on the subject of health care, would you give us your views on what's happened nationally with the rollout of the new health care law, in particular, all of the difficulties that people are having? And do you believe this could have an impact on the success of the law?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish Minnesota from the national. President Obama, said yesterday, and he's the leading authority, that he was not satisfied with the way the federal rollout, which affects 37 states directly, 36 states directly, who are all subsumed under that. But fortunately, we decided to go our own route in Minnesota, and the legislature supported that. And I think the MNsure beginning has been not perfect, but it's been given this, given the given the complexity and the scope of the project, I think it's performed phenomenally well. You know, and despite everybody who's watching every step to see if they can't come in and attack it and exaggerate the problems and try to disrupt or destroy it, you know, they completed it. I've got the numbers as of Monday. 18,611 accounts for individual or family coverage, 591 small employer accounts. So there's a lot of interest. A lot of people are, and people are still shopping around as they should be. So a lot of them haven't completed the application process, but they're engaged in the process, and I think that will just continue to increase. And it's going to be a year, before we really have a sense of the scope of public participation. I mean, none of these programs that it gets compared to in Medicare Part D. I was in the Senate when that was passed. That was 2 years from the time of passage to the time it took effect administratively. So these things take a while. This is a huge, vastly, and just unbelievably complicated and vast project. The IT software is just, beyond my comprehension. But the way they describe it, it's unprecedented. And we're on the cutting edge. We're ahead of virtually any other state, and even the federal government. So we're pioneering this whole undertaking, and I think it's been done extraordinarily well. If the amount of time and effort and round-the-clock work by MNsure staff, Department of Commerce, Department of Human Services, and the private consultants, it's just been truly extraordinary.
The administration have gotten it so wrong.
You'd have to ask them. I don't know. Well, the postmortems are just beginning. I haven't been following the federal very closely. I follow to the extent that its performance affects Minnesota, and a couple of the glitches that Minnesota's encountered have been because they needed the interface with the federal system. But I've got enough challenges running Minnesota government. I haven't tried to take on the federal government. And
I'm sorry, go ahead, Rachel.
If a year from now that fuller analysis is done and it's judged not to be a success, should you be reelected?
That's what the people of Minnesota decide. That's one factor they'll take into consideration. But we'll see.
Do you still believe critics of the healthcare law want to disrupt and destroy it here in Minnesota? Disrupt and destroy the words you use?
Yeah, well, disrupt certainly, exaggerate the problems. There's one claim made by one of the people who's opposed to this on his Twitter account saying that the rates in Minnesota were 20 to 50% higher, the exchange rates than are the current rates. And when he was pressed by a member of the press for that source of that, he wasn't able or wouldn't provide it, and then he backed off the claim. Those are the kind of misinformation that's being thrown about. And I get letters from various legislators. Every slight misstep or glitch is jumped upon, and they want 400 questions answered. And anything that goes positive, they have no interest in whatsoever. There's no desire to have a balanced overview or have an ongoing dialogue, constructive suggestions for improving it. It's just about discrediting it and trying to make it look as bad as possible. And I thought when a comparison was made to Medicare Part D, that it was really an apt comparison. I was in the Senate when that passed. I voted against it, as did most Democratic senators, because of the donut hole. But once it passed, it was the law of the land. And we worked to close the donut hole. We worked to have more Medicare be able to negotiate lower prices and the like. So we tried to improve the law, and we didn't go out there and try to destroy the law. We didn't go out there and try to discredit it. We accepted that decision was made. It's lawful. Time to move ahead. And this is just I've never seen anything like this in my career, where people are just still. It was voted by the Congress, signed a law by the President, ruled constitutional by the United States Supreme Court. There was a presidential election after that. candidate who was for it got elected, the candidate who was against it was not elected. I mean, what more conclusion do we need? And then you got, 41 attempts in the House of Representatives to deny the funding for it, and then the shutdown sort of evolved, but it started out as a method of trying to leverage defunding of this program. So I've just never seen anything like this before.
Back to the Southwest corridor a little bit. Just tell us a little bit more about next steps. Are the stakeholders talking about maybe getting a consultant on board to address maybe the environmental regulations, that sort of thing? Just anything about when the Metropolitan Council might actually when you hope that they'll take this up, given that it was delayed earlier this month to actually move this forward.
Well, we'll have another meeting next week to try to flesh out some of those questions, which are good questions, about exactly what the process will be, who will manage it, how we can expand the citizen participation and still have it be manageable. Pat Bourne, the chief administrator for the Met Council today, said that the environmental questions that need to be answered should be answered in the next 90 days. The draft EIS will not be entirely completed in 90 days, would not have been anyway, and there's some dispute about whether the process requires the draft EIS to be completed before municipal consent can be requested and like. So there's still some unanswered questions there, but I think in the framework of 90 days we should have the questions answered that are outstanding now.
Your campaign sent out a fundraising appeal today with a petition asking people to sign to lawmakers to support the minimum wage increase that you're asking for. Can you talk about your thinking behind that and where you want to go to right now lacks legislative support?
Well, I don't know if it lacks legislative support. I mean, last time, the end of the session, time ran out and they hadn't worked out the House and the Senate, their differences. But I've been for a living wage for more than a decade, which is a wage at which level one person working full-time can earn enough income to keep a family of four at or slightly above the poverty level, and then with more experience, more training, move up and achieve the American dream. We say we want work to pay, we want to incentivize people to work, but if you're working full-time for $6.15 an hour, you're mired in poverty, and you're not going to have the reasons to get the training, get the experience, even keep the job. And then the rest of us pay the difference. We pay with the public medical care programs. We pay with the earned income tax credit, with food stamps. I mean, all the things that people need because they don't have enough income who are working. And those that are, as I say, are not incentivized to work because they can't earn a decent living. So, we stand to have enormous gains from a minimum wage where people can start to achieve the American dream.
Governor, back to the exchange. The governor of Kentucky has been a huge cheerleader of their Connect exchange. I think they're one of the most successful with something like 15,000 enrollees. Do you think that you've done enough to encourage people to use the exchange? Could you do more?
We've got 18,611.
Well, those are user accounts, though.
Well, what enrollees, you mean people who signed up for health care? I mean, again, I don't think that's a valid measure because, that's an impressive number. But people are, have until December 15th to shop around and consider their options. These are complicated and significant decisions. So the fact that people are on board and are looking at their options, to me, is really the indicator of the level of interest. But I'm, can disagree with that.
Governor, you've said repeatedly that voting-related issues should have bipartisan support. As you know, Secretary of State Ritchie created an online voter registration system without legislative specific instructions. What do you think about his decision to do that?
Well, I support the intent of Secretary Ritchie, and I agree with him that this is we ought to be making voting as possible for people who are, and especially those who are not now registered. And I also agree with Senator Sieben, who has said that she thinks the legislature needs to be involved in in authorizing and directing that effort. So I guess I would fall down on the side of, it's a good idea, but one that we should get legislative support. The problem has become now that, and I haven't resolved how to do this because I'm committed to saying that any change election law has to be bipartisan, but the Republicans are just stonewalling anything that they don't like. I mean, they just know right now they've got a hammerlock on any reform for election law, and so they just, it's just a non-starter. And I don't know the remedy for that, but it concerns me because if there isn't going to be a willingness to make it more possible for people to vote, just because somebody thinks their political interests are going to be disadvantaged in that, and then there's something wrong with our process.
But Republicans did support some voting changes within this past session, and there was that bipartisan support. In this case, that was never even brought up.
Well, I guess if you're correct, in which case, some more reason why Senator Stephen, I'm guessing, took the position she did, that it should have legislative review and should have legislative approval in order to proceed.
Governor, it's early in the process, but on voting, are you supportive of electronic poll books? The recommendations are due out in January, but is that something you'd support?
What?
Electronic poll books.
I'm not familiar enough with the issue to know. I know a little bit about electronic poll tabs, but I don't know anything about it. I don't know.
Governor, speaking of the poll tax and all that, does big business have a hand up on dealing with government? And I ask that in the sense if you're a big business person, you have your numbers in front of you, you have your accountant, you have your attorney. Government is a lot more awkward. You have to get things through the legislature. You have to make various deals here and there to move things forward. Does big business, is it a level playing field, or does big business have a little bit of an advantage?
Advantage in what?
In negotiating and coming up with deals with government.
Well, it depends on what deal. I mean, if it's a real estate deal, and the principal, that's their career, they're certainly going to have an advantage in those negotiations. If it's the healthcare contracts now, I think the competitive bid is really important because there you get the experts competing with one another, and that's why I think that's been a really important reform a number of years now in the state procurement process. But businesses they have sharp pencils. They're looking at the bottom line. They know that every fraction of a penny adds or subtraction of that bottom line. So I mean, they have a lot of expertise and a lot of skill set that's developed, honed for that purpose. That's very, very worthwhile. They have that.
Governor, the Environmental Quality Board is going to be having taking public input on about 3 times in the near future on the model ordinance for local governments related to frac sand mining. Just wanted to throw the question out to you, what your thinking is either on what the model ordinance should contain, or just the issue more broadly as you're thinking on the frac sand mining in southeastern Minnesota.
Well, I personally favor a ban on any frac sand mining in that region of the state, southeastern region of the state, because of the ecology, the karsts, the environment, the way of life that will really be disrupted by a lot of trucks starting to rumble through county roads and the like. But that didn't pass the legislature, so we're working with the law as it did pass and wanting to be fair and objective in enforcement of it. But I've told DNR and MBCA that they need to be extremely vigilant in watching over these and make sure that some rogue operator doesn't really destroy the immediate environment and also the whole industry. I was very, very disappointed, and I expressed this to the people involved when this draft report came out, which was at staff level, before the new executive director even arrived, and put him seriously behind the 8 ball because a lot of people in that area are concerned about this, were very upset. So now they've got to come back and try to remedy that damage and also set up a policy. So I want it to be as strong and vigilant and protective as it possibly can within the letter of the law. And we'll try again. We'll see how this goes, but I'm not, don't rule out trying to get next year or coming back the year after to get a ban entirely, because I don't see the job benefits being sufficient to outweigh the potential risks.
Can you expand on the ban thought that you just expressed?
What?
The thought about banning next year? Is that something that?
Silica sand mining in southeastern Minnesota, it would not affect, you have to define the geographical area, it wouldn't affect the silica sand mining that's been going on in the Minnesota River Valley for 40, 50 years or more. But in that area, which is, as I say, it has a lot of these sinkholes, karsts, and a lot of streams, and a lot of tourism, recreation that's based on the ecology and just a way of life in that area. I mean, a lot of people commute to Rochester or wherever, and just that's their way of life. You got the Amish communities there, and you got every one of these projects, you get 30 trucks coming down the highway or the road, and you multiply that by 5 operators, suddenly you have 150 trucks. I mean, really going to be disruptive to people's way of life. It's going to be destructive to the county roads and the like, and those are the kind of issues that the counties need some technical advice in how to deal with them.
Governor?
Mining, the executive council's meeting Friday to approve the mining leases up north. Can you talk about your feelings on that process and what you see happening in the future?
Well, I'm calling in, but so I'll be on the phone, and I mean there are 3 votes, as I understand it, to proceed. Lieutenant Governor's, the Attorney General's, and mine. I don't know what the other 2 positions are, but that's sufficient to proceed. And every one of these matters is going to be contested by somebody, and that's just the way it's going to be. DNR, I think, as a result of this experience, improved significantly its procedures for notifying people who are potentially affected by these decisions and actions. But even so, it's just going to be much more problematic to move anything forward. And the kind of things, for example, in the iron ore mining and taconite production, that before it was sort of a tacit truce that had been established. Now that's gone, and everything is going to be litigated, or threatened to be litigated.
Governor, in light of the recent 20,000 barrel oil pipeline break in North Dakota, realizing a lot of the oil does come through Minnesota either by pipeline or rail cars, maybe even trucks. Is there enough protection for Minnesotans against this oil coming from the west?
Well, when I was one of the first things I was able to do when I was first commissioner of economic development was a pipeline explosion, and we got the law changed that we had to bury the pipeline at 6 feet rather than 3 feet. That was more for liquid nitrogen and natural gas, but I can't say what deficiencies, if there are any. We should certainly be made aware of those and deal with it. We certainly want to maximize safety and protection of people and wildlife and the ecology of our state, while recognizing that you're going to move something like oil from one place to another. It's got to be transported somehow, and there's no perfect guaranteed safe way to do that, but we should take every precaution.
I think you haven't asked for a report on how Minnesota's...
No, but it's a good idea. I'll do so.
Any other questions?
Could I do it?
Okay.
Okay, thanks.